Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next session of CME Palooza Fall. My name is Scott Kober. I am the co-producer of CME Palooza, and I would like to welcome you to this session, which is probably about 2 or 3 years in the making. Session is titled Social Media CME, Shiny Object or Real Deal. This session is sponsored by Helio CME and Medscape. It's actually a topic I proposed to one of our panelists probably 2 or 3 years ago and was told, no, it's not quite ready yet. And then this year, I was told, yes, I think we're finally ready to go. I think this is going to be a really interesting presentation and topic to kind of talk through. So our moderator for this session is Allison Gardner. Allison is the Senior Vice President of Educational Strategy and Content at MedIQ. And she'll be introducing and helping introduce the rest of our panel here momentarily. But before we get to that, as we do with all of our CME Palooza sessions, I would like to thank all of the sponsors of CME Palooza Fall. Our gold sponsors, Daiichi Sankyo, Med Learning Group, Physician Education Resource. Our silver sponsors, Academy for Continued Healthcare Learning, Academic CME, Antidote Education Company, Catamount Medical Education, DKE Med, Hippocrates, Helio CME, Integrity CE, Medscape Education, Platform Q Health Education, Prova Education, Red Med Ed, and Vindigo Medical Education. And finally, our many bronze sponsors, Answers in CME, AxDev, Bonum Continuing Education, Creative Educational Concepts, CMEology, Excalibur Medical Education, Global Education Group, Infograph Ed, MedIQ, Partners for Advancing Clinical Education, Paradigm Medical Communications, Postgraduate Institute for Medicine, PriMed, TBI, RMEI Medical Education, and Wright Medicine. Also like to thank the sponsor of the CME Palooza Spectacular Challenge, Galen Health, from last week, for those of you who participated in that program. So as with all of our CME Palooza questions or sessions, there are 3 ways to ask questions. You can use the CME Outfitters text line to send in a question. The number is 267-6660-CME. Tweet your question to us using the CME Palooza hashtag. Or if you all watch this in YouTube, which you can open on our live page by clicking on the Watch on YouTube button on the lower left-hand corner, you can enter in questions within the YouTube chat function that is using social media. So we will be incorporating audience response questions during this presentation using Poll Everywhere. Thank you to our sponsor of the ARS system, Broadcast Suite Studios. So for those of you who have not yet downloaded the Poll Everywhere app, please do so and go to the presentation entitled CME Palooza 005 or type in the following URL in a web browser, www.pollev.com/CME Palooza 005. Finally, our speaker disclosure. The opinions, discussions, and or conclusions expressed are those of our panelists and do not represent an endorsement by or a position of their employer, its parent company, or their affiliates. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Allison Gardner to introduce the rest of our panel before we get into this topic.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. Hello to everybody out there in, the universe. We had so much fun on our planning calls, getting ready for this session. It's going to be a great conversation. I have learned a lot, and I hope you will learn a lot. This is a fantastic group of people. So let's jump right in. We can start with introductions. Scott was kind enough to do mine, but I would like to run through and have each of our panelists introduce themselves. And Janan, since you are at the top of my little window, let's start with you.
Hello, thank you so much. My name is Dr. Janan Sarwar. I'm a pharmacist. I currently work as a freelance medical writer, medical editor, and I own Global Bookshelves International. Thank you for having me today.
Great, we're glad to have you. Let's go to my other Allison Kickle.
Hi, I'm Allison Kickle. I'm the president of Bonum CE, and I really appreciate being here. And congratulations, Scott and Derek. 8 years is kind of incredible.
9 years. 9 years.
My gosh.
All right, last and certainly not least, Kurt, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself too?
Great, thank you, Allison. Appreciate it, and Scott. And I truly did have had just a blast working on this with the team. Kurt Clayfeld, Managing Director with CME Institute, and really look forward to this discussion today.
All right, we are going to start with some ARS questions. So Scott, I will turn it back to you to get those teed up.
Okay, so for those folks who have Poll Everywhere queued up, we have a few questions to start this session. So this is our icebreaker question. What percentage of women working today in CME are named Allison or Amanda? 0 to 25%, 26 to 50%, 51 to 75%, 76 to 100%, or I don't get it. Is this some sort of weird inside joke? It is some sort of weird inside joke, but it is also true. So the correct answer, well, I'm not sure what the correct answer is, but let's say probably B, 26 to 50%. Apparently lots of people who had children in the 1970s named their daughters Allison or Amanda, and many of them ended up in CME. We obviously have two Allisons on this panel. Okay, here is our next question. These get into a little bit more serious topics. Which of the following social media platforms do you use for professional purposes? Choose all that apply. LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I'll be fascinated to see if anybody uses TikTok for professional purposes. One person. We'll have to have those people enter in their information and comments, and we can figure out how they use TikTok for professional purposes.
That would be cool.
Anything surprising to anybody on here?
I just love all the responses. Lots of great feedback.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm surprised YouTube's so low, honestly.
Yeah.
Okay, here is so this is the crux of this session. So we're going to ask you this before the session begins, and we're going to revisit it after the session is over. Social media in CME, shiny object or real deal?
Ooh.
All right, shiny objects, we see you. We see you.
So what I told the panel before the session is, I don't know if they do their job well. Is this going to be more real deals, or is this going to be more shiny objects at the end? So we will have to see. All right. So I think that's great. So I think this is almost a pretty even split. So I think that's our last ARS question to start out with. So with that, I am going to turn things over to the panel to get the discussion going.
Great, thank you. When we were planning this session, we thought maybe a good place to start was to talk about how we have used social media in education in our various roles. And what it could do is just illustrate, the variety and how the many different forms that this type of education would take. What was interesting, and maybe not so interesting and not surprising, is that we had all used social media to do various types of education related to COVID. So we thought that that would be a good focusing example. So to start, what we are going to do is go around the horn and share just different examples of how we have in our various roles leveraged social media to provide education on the topic of COVID. So Kurt, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Allison. So being a CME organization, as well as having a sister organization, which is a publisher, which publishes the Primary Care Companion, we recently had a publication on long COVID, specifically the psychiatric effects of long COVID. And it really just seemed like a natural fit for us to turn that into a CME tweetorial. So, it really focused on, the things that folks were seeing, particularly in all ages, as well as in adolescence, including brain fog, headache, trouble concentrating, and that sort of thing. And it seemed like a natural fit to bring that out into the Twitter world as an educational opportunity and offer CME credit for it. And so since we have some really nice talented team members who were able to implement that for us, we launched that recently and have done other tutorials on other topics as well.
That's great. Thanks. Let's turn it over to Allison Kickle. Why don't you talk to us about what you did in the thick of COVID on social media?
Yes, definitely. And so I've done a number of programs my group has focused on COVID, but I think the most interesting one was in December of 2020 when vaccines were really new and we had very limited data in immunocompromised populations. We gathered a group of, I think, 9 or 10 KOLs in the GI space to do a session, and each one took a separate topic within vaccinations. And this was a time when we really didn't know a lot. And when we talk about rapid dissemination of information, it was pretty essential. And so we did basically an impromptu Twitter chat, and everyone took a question. And then we had a discussion led by a patient advocate that went through patient perspectives. And then it was a continuum that went on throughout the spring of 21 with COVID vaccination programs targeting HCPs and patients.
Great, thanks. How about Janan? Tell us about what you have done.
Yeah, so I've been involved in some rapid fire expert podcasts that were recorded with subject matter experts. As Allison and everyone has recommended, it was during a time where protocols were changing, new vaccines, new treatments. It was really important for clinicians that are at the sites that know what's going on, maybe the research centers, or maybe even distributing the medications or the treatments or the vaccines, kind of disseminating that information out to the public. So having something like a podcast that's easy to record remotely, easy to produce, and easy to put out there quickly was really important at that time.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a theme that comes through, right? That rapid dissemination of information. Stuff was unfolding and changing what felt like daily, right? So I think social media really was a great platform to be able to put information out there. From our perspective, we have long focused on using social media to educate patients. And something that was really advantageous for us is that when you have a social media influencer, those are really trusted communities, and this information was new and times were weird and things felt really scary. When you have a community like that where there's a lot of trust built up, you can bring experts into that space and just make some real difference, I think. So again, just a really wonderful confluence of being able to put out information that got up above the fray, right? Because there was just a lot of noise in our lives in those days. So I think it's not a surprise to be able to share with those of us, those watching, that the four of us fall into CME is the real deal category, especially when it comes to putting education out into the world. And so we are starting our campaign to convince the 40% of you who maybe are on the fence, or you think that this is just kind of a flash in the pan type thing. So to start that Hearts and Minds campaign that we're waging today, we want to talk about why we think putting education out on social media is such a good idea. So why don't we start with Janan, with your background and thinking about how technology can be brought into education. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about how you think that is to the benefit of educating professionals?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I have a background in educational technology, research and development, and finding ways to implement technology to learn how learners are learning, the metacognition of how you reflect on learning, the confidence that you have. All of these can be measured in real time. All of these can be measured in such a beautiful way when you use social media, as we just described in our case studies. There's a way to integrate this technology to measure things and also see who's arriving and have this message reach. The reach that we can have with social media, people who are listening even to this panel who may not even know what CME is, but understand that I'm sure everyone knows that CME is continuing medical education, but just understanding that we're talking about something that it's education. You can learn things now. I know a couple of people answered TikTok, but I now can use social media to learn new things that's related to my work as well as unrelated to my work that's for fun. And to find this intersection of a land or a space where you can do both, it's kind of refreshing after being clinicians. A lot of clinicians that are out there are having really demanding lives right now, if you really think of the status of where we are. And so being able to go to a social media platform, but also walk away with learning something, that's a huge opportunity.
I think it's a great point what you just made about being able to go to where they are, right? There's a lot of pressure to be a clinician right now. And so Allison, can you talk about your experience and how you view social media as a way to kind of make it easier on them?
Definitely. I think if we consider educational congresses and conferences, they're fairly siloed. So you've got like an AANP, for example, and you might have an APHA conference, and these different conferences, while something like ASCO has a multidisciplinary audience or multi-specialty credentialed audience, generally they're fairly tiered to physicians. And I think one of the challenges with that is there's not a discussion forum between what's representative of our real healthcare team. And so there's a lot of barriers to that in the traditional CME programming. When you think about social media CME, it breaks down all those walls and flattens those hierarchies. Also, people are more comfortable having that discussion between the different groups. So you may have a program that has a dietitian and a nurse and a physician and a managed care professional, and it obviously has to be appropriate, but it's far more representative of the healthcare team. And there seems to be, because of the rules of engagement on social media, respectful discourse, it tends to go really well, and we get different perspectives. And I'd be doing us a disservice if I didn't mention the patient and patient advocate perspective. So, for example, a program I did last night, one of our most intentionally active participants is a patient advocate and a TNBC survivor. So I think that that's another important voice to get out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that. And, so Kurt, Allison mentioned conferences. And so why don't you talk about the value that you see related to social media and being able to kind of recap and get that buzz that often you can feel in a Congress Center out into the world?
Sure, absolutely. And I can't help but just think about what's been done with CME Palooza, right? As far as creating the buzz and keeping the conversation going, starting it from scratch, and really involving folks. And I think it's a key part of that is the immediacy. So for those large congresses, whether it's American College of Cardiology or a psych congress or whatever it might be, when new information comes out, new perspectives are shared, certainly delivering those to the masses and to those other specialties that may not be at the meeting for whatever reason, whether it's just they are in the specialty and didn't make the meeting, or are primary care and perhaps seeing patients with a particular issue, can actually gain that information, and more importantly, I think, have real live conversations about the issues that they're seeing in their practice on a regular basis. So I really see this as another offering in our toolbox, as well as an opportunity for us to advance our craft of medical education through starting those conversations early. So.
And on to Kurt's point, I think if we think back to the last presentation with Mark and Renee and Karen, they made a point that said data at time of publication is on average 3 years old. And
Right.
CME CE is going to have a need for evidence-based content, but that's ridiculous if we're trying to inform people on something that can improve patient care. And so I think we really need to think about different tactics that reduce that time from research to practice. And the old model is not doing it. So I think this is one way that we can consider to augment other efforts that are ongoing.
I think that's a great point. And, back to the whole siloing, right? If there's a meeting and maybe you work in a family practice type office, but you have a specific interest in diabetes. So, you're not necessarily in sort of that endocrinology space, or, you really care about the high science, you can definitely tap in, engage, learn, all of those wonderful things that we're talking about with the benefits of social media. So we're going to bring in another ARS question as we shift gear and think about outcomes as it relates to social media. And I wonder if part of this, this outcomes piece factors into people wondering, like, is this the real deal or is it not? So let's do our question and then we'll dive into this topic.
And I would say too, please comment if you think it's just a shiny object or you think it's the real deal. Please tell us why. Use the text line, and Scott, they can use it in that way, right? They can use the text line that way.
Yeah, they can text in comments to me, and I'll kind of I can share that feedback. So you can text to me, you can put it in the YouTube comments, however you want to do it. So here's the results of our next question. In a social media-based CME activity, the highest level of outcomes that can possibly be attained. So we're having, again, across the board, a lot of knowledge, but certainly some participation, some competence, and a few people saying performance.
Yeah, I think, what we've been talking about with using it out of conferences and sort of sharing out those new insights as they come, that seems like a natural fit, right? But I think, people like Allison are very vocal about it can be bigger than that, right? And there have been conferences, I think back to the AIS conference in the spring, where there was a very dynamic conversation happening in one of those sessions about, well, what do these look like and what can we expect? And I think that, first you have to understand sort of appreciate what social media is, right? It is not a traditional LMS type system. I'm checking out tweets as I'm waiting in line at the grocery store, or, you kind of fit it in where you can, but that doesn't mean that things aren't sinking in, right? Learning is happening. Perhaps if I'm a clinician, then I might take that into the exam room. So, Allison, since this is an area where you talk a lot about, tell us about how you view outcomes and why you think that actually we can bump it past knowledge and get into some of those higher level outcomes with this type of platform.
Absolutely. I think first we need to consider what's the format, where is it hosted, and what are the capabilities of that format? Because different things that we're using, TikTok is very, very different than Twitter, for example. And so you have to consider the technological limitations of the platform in planning. Don't promise you can do pre and post test, because on TikTok, not to my awareness, you can not natively within the platform. But on Twitter, for example, you can use polling questions. And if we step back and consider what do we think are the appropriate benchmarks for traditional outcomes assessment. So in my mind, I think at the most basic, it's understanding baseline of whatever level of measure you're trying to achieve, knowledge, competence, performance, whatnot, before the educational intervention or throughout, after that education, and then reassessing to see if you've made any changes, participation and satisfaction through an evaluation. So within TikTok, you have the utility of polling questions that you can use. And so that's what I've been doing for a really long time. Now, that's not to say that there aren't limitations even within that. They're only live for 7 days. But beyond 7 days, is anyone going to see your program? So I think a broader understanding of how each platform works and what happens within that platform, and then being very honest with whoever your internal stakeholders are or your supporter organization to say, if I do it on Twitter, for example, the pre and post polling, I'm not going to be able to do match pair data, but I'll augment that data we have an offsite survey that's hosted that people who want to claim credit will go and complete. And I can do match pair data with that. So I think that that's an important point when we talk about what level. Performance, that's interesting. For the people who answered yes on that, I'd love to get everyone's thoughts, but I also think I have some maybe controversial perspectives on what truly meeting performance measures are.
Get into it, girl.
I mean,
let's talk about it, right?
Yeah.
I think this is a great place to do that.
I just, and I give the maybe not so kind example, but when we were teenagers, we all knew how to answer the Cosmopolitan magazine like quiz or the Teen Vogue or whatever. And I knew what to say to get people, to get my end result. Maybe that says something terrible about me. But I think that that's often too how clinicians are answering. So you either have to be a very, very good question designer and have this spaced appropriately that it's going to work within the clinician's time to really assess, is this truly a change? And so I consider QI programs, that's the performance measure to me. But I know that that's not a perspective that's generally adopted by the rest of the industry.
Mhm.
So I've got a quick question. This came over the CME Outfitters Q&A line, and I think Kurt or Allison or John, anybody can probably address this. So for these tutorials that you guys were involved with, any idea roughly what percentage of your participants, clinicians, actually went the next step to claim CE credit?
Tiny.
Yeah.
From our experience.
Yeah, it's not a big number. I think parlaying that into the conversation we were just having about outcomes, certainly I know we can measure knowledge and probably competence. I feel like it's a situational outcomes assessment, right? Although we're not necessarily going performance and we're not, patient health and population health in these. We've done a lot of research and some interviews with HCPs of all walks of life, and they've given us these snippets about why they're actually, where they're getting their CME, why they're doing it that way. Some of them are getting it in the restroom. Some of them are getting it in their drive to work or their train to work. And I think that the ones who are faced with a challenge in their practice and get the answer, or at least some sort of education that helps them to make a decision through social media, they're at that higher level, right? So they're going out and implementing that change.
Okay, so this is a really good question. This one just came in, so I'm going to read this one off my phone here. Okay, it seems naive / rosy colored glasses to say social media is an arena of quote unquote respectful discourse. What strategies or techniques have been developed for managing social media education when it is non-respectful or worse? Anyone had any experience with someone posting a comment, a tweet that perhaps wasn't the kindest thing around?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And to the point where I'm getting contacted by the Associated Press and my legal is involved. In general, though, I will say, so I started doing programming in late 2017, and that is by far and away the worst incident, and the others pale in comparison. I think what's important to note is that if you're organically deriving your audience, if you're doing lots of promotion and it's going out to just anyone, you can get some trolls. And I work really hard to do that. Now, to not use those advertisements. Now, other people are having success with it and they've improved over time. In live meeting planning, you have generally what's called a red book, and it teaches you how to deal with anything that comes in. Somebody gets sick at your conference, here's what you do. There's a tornado, here's what you do. You need the same thing for social media programming, because if you're not prepared with some stock responses, flowcharts of who needs to be involved, different triage and escalation policies, then you're going to find yourself in an absolute panic, and that's poor planning. I think that social media has been viewed as this place where people beat up on people, they get doxxed, they get trolled, the whole deal. But I think when you have this different network of healthcare providers and they're among their peers and colleagues, generally they do really well. So I'm really curious to hear the rest of the group's experience, because it hasn't been a problem for me except the one time, and it was like this off thing and it got dealt with. But, out of hundreds and hundreds of programs now, that's the absolute worst, and everything else is not even close.
I'll absolutely share my thoughts here. Social media is risky. It is unregulated. It is raw. It is real. It's organic, as Allison said. It's real life. That's actually the benefit of it being social media. We're taking theory and we're trying to gain application. And that's what this outcome section we're talking about. And I see some questions in the chat of saying, what if someone, a participant, is posting something inaccurate? How do you handle? I believe it actually makes a lot of sense if someone's saying they come to social media and they're actually not even claiming their CE credit. Social media to me is where you come to whet your appetite. You're scrolling and you see something and maybe it just sticks that, oh, I should probably learn more about that. That's relevant. That's the way social media works. They know when you're pausing, they know what you're stopping on. And I want to say, if you're a clinician getting your advice exclusively from TikTok and Twitter and TikTok alone, that's a problem, I'm sure. I think that's what we all agree on. It is not meant, I don't think we're saying it's a real deal. It's not a shiny object. There are shiny aspects of it, but we have to filter. And the fact that you can get something so raw and pure and unfiltered, we're in a day and age where you can actually contact your favorite author and they might respond back. You can contact the person who wrote. I mean, now when public studies are published, you can contact the corresponding author and get a response, maybe on Twitter, maybe get retweeted. I mean, we become part of the story. Suddenly, we as the people who create it, we as the people who imbibe this CME. So it's a really interesting opportunity. And yeah, you have to roll with the punches, as Allison said before.
I think that's just such a great point, Janan, and thinking about how, oh God, the point just left. It just left, just right like that.
All right. Well, we've got another question. So I'll let you think about that. So this also came in over the CME Outfitters Q&A line. So this is more of a nuts and bolts question. So how do things like front matter, disclosures work in a social media accredited activity?
Okay, can I redeem myself with that one, maybe? Sorry. So, yeah, all of that stuff, especially if you're going to put accreditation on education, all of that matters, right? So what we have done is we'll put some basic stuff and then we can link out, right? Like you can see all of the disclosures and things like that out on our webpage. But we'll just say that this is accredited, it's sponsored by this group. Here's our faculty, and here's where you can go for more information.
We do the same. We put up a disclosure image that has a bunch of information on it. There's some information in the tweet and then a bit.ly link that goes out to full information. Yeah, so we try to put out really the most critical parts. I think most people don't need to know the tech requirements right immediately. They want to know people's disclosures. They want to know if it was funded, if it was certified. I also think going back to the certification and credit, this is evolving and what we think is important. You know, a completer might be more important in social media with a micro activity than it is in a more traditional longer form program. And I think as we consider those different metrics, so what is the value of certification or accreditation within one of these programs? It's generally, most specialists don't need the credit anyway. They don't need that certificate, but it works as a great content validation measure and an independence verification measure. It helps that clinicians weed through all the noise on social media and determine what they should be going to. So I think that that's an important note because that conversion rate's very low. But then again, if I look at some of my more traditional digital programs, sometimes you know, I have a lot of retirees who have taken my webinars. I'm glad they're there, but I'm not sure that that certificate is the biggest benchmark for the success of my program.
Yeah, I think maybe just to close out our outcomes conversation, there's more tools and data points, I think, that are available through social media that can be meaningful, right? So Janan, can you talk a little bit about the different types of engagements and sort of how we can take the way that people interact with social media and build that into our narrative of, you know, how did this matter? How did people see it, engage with it? And how can that contribute to the impact story at the end of the day?
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure we'll address this more as we kind of explore the different platforms. So it's important. I think Allison Kickle was mentioning this. You need to make sure you know who you're speaking to, what the topic is, and who cares. And when you are able to look back and see what was a target market and who actually attended this, you will not necessarily be able to see the actual impact, because maybe it's not even when it's on social media, maybe it's not even clinicians that are hearing the information, as we've said before. And that impact of, wow, I didn't even know this was an important topic. The way we're advertising for these CME programs, you're also including the fact that being posted on social media, hashtags, and the way people interact with finding information, and not just hashtags, but the way that social media works to bring people to the content itself. It's driving the content to the people that want to see it and need to see it, right? And the engagement you may see, whether that is in the comments itself on a live activity or in the post, you can look at such detailed information these days with the analytics to know who's coming, the demographics, the age, how long they're engaging, how many minutes they're there, when are they leaving. All of this is very informative when you really look at the big picture. And you can use that to inform your next experience that you create utilizing social media. Again, the data can be overwhelming, but it can also be an asset and a huge tool that, once again, when in the closed door areas, when we're talking about, back in the day of having CME conferences or doing our things that are like webinars, you can't get this depth of information, again, because we have such a broad net we can cast here. So very intriguing about engagement and how you can measure that.
I think your point about the comments brought back my elusive point that embarrassingly flew out of my head the second that I opened my mouth. But what I was going to say there too is that in the comments, I mean, how many times in medicine is there no one really neat answer that fits in a box, right? And so another potential of this platform is it gives space for people of all different ranks to be able to talk about, well, actually, I would do this, or what about this? Because there's so many shades of gray when we think about what is right for a patient. It might depend on who that patient is or where that person practices, what's available to them. So I think all of these things together, again, you're right, Janan, that you can drown in all this data, right? But it's just being able to know what you can get and be able to craft the narrative around that we don't have to solely go back to pre and post test answers and comparing those two, though if we can do that, that's wonderful that we can demonstrate immediate learning from it. But there's so many other sources that we can pull into the story. So Kurt, anything that you want to add on outcomes before we kind of skip to our next topic here?
No, I think it's really been a great conversation.
Okay.
Allison, I want to say one quick thing on what you just said. So a program I do, it was basically built around that idea that there are patients who fall through the cracks in the guidelines. Everything is different. Your private practice, academic practice, really the clinic down the road is very different than the one maybe the faculty is practicing in. And so to deny the utility or the promise of being able to crowdsource information, especially when it comes to patient cases, it's foolhardy. So where you think about faculty at maybe MD Anderson who get emailed with cases from all over the country and it's going to one person and one person's commenting and a real burden on their time. Now you can take a resource from all the clinicians who are on this platform and they can provide unique perspectives. So I think really interestingly, I saw a conversation about the differences between guidelines and the strength of the data for the different treatments within guidelines. That's an important discussion and you're not going to get it in a lot of other places. So I think there really is benefit to the kind of content that we can address and that how the group can crowdsource answers to these complex clinical problems.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so there's a bunch of questions that are coming in. So I'm going to throw a couple of quick ones at you guys that are kind of nuts and bolts questions. First question, this is from the CME Outfitters Q&A line. How do you estimate credit hours for social media-based education?
Actual duration or pilot testing, same ways for anything else.
Yeah.
If
Okay,
a
so
live conversation goes on for an hour, certified for an hour. So pretty straight, same way we've done it before.
okay. Another question. Any therapeutic areas that you found are that are easier or harder to get an audience there and to participate?
In terms of easier, I'll jump in to say, oncology has been a great fit for this. Data is coming out constantly. It's a pretty wonky crew. And so being able to take a lot of that data and parse it on these platforms, we do a lot of the work in that area.
Okay, so one more question from the CME Outfitters Q&A line. You guys, are all working for medical education companies. Any knowledge, experience with partnering with societies, associations to develop, push out social media-based CME to their membership?
Yes, and I think it can be a great augment to the work that they're doing and a great credibility factor to the work that you're doing. A lot of these groups don't have the capacity, the technological know-how. There's other barriers that you need to consider. It just takes a lot longer on the run. I mean, if you've been working in this industry for a while and you've worked with society foundation partners, it takes longer. So prepare way in advance to work with them, approvals, et cetera, lay out expectations, roles, and responsibilities very clearly. But I think there's great potential for partnership either between hospital health systems and societies and foundations. Again, it's levels the hierarchy, but in more than one way.
Okay, I've got a few more questions I'm going to hold for a little bit, so I'll let you guys get back to, I know you guys have another topic or two that you want to cover here.
Great, thanks, Scott. So it's something, we can revisit a place where we started to go in the last section, and it really is, what is the place of social media education in the broad landscape of CME, of CE education? And I don't think that any of us are suggesting that this will one day replace education on an LMS. So, Kurt, why don't you talk about how you view social media education and different types of activities on this channel? How does that augment some more traditional types of education that you do?
Yeah, Allison, I think you summed it up really well. I like to think it as diversifying the portfolio. For decades now, we've been looking at educational curricula with multiple interactions and learning opportunities for physicians and learners. So this is just another tool in the box and something that we should be including anywhere that it makes sense to not only. I kind of think back in the day when we had Satellite Symposium and somebody said, hey, let's do a CD-ROM and mail it out to folks, right? That diversification and the opportunity for folks to either have the same education another time, interact on it, or really be able to share it with colleagues is just phenomenal. And certainly the day and age that we're in, I think it's an integral part of our offerings moving forward, and certainly a bonus for the learner community.
Great, thanks. And Janan, your words are going to stay with me for a while, where you said, if you're getting all your education on TikTok, we have a problem. That's not good for anybody.
But, at the same time, it's really nice when I'm scrolling on TikTok and I see some sort of advertisement, or it's an actual CME geared towards CME about a new product. I'm a pharmacist. It's important for me to know what my friends are going to ask me about, right? Or maybe it's an herbal supplement and we're talking about an Ayurveda like CME. We are getting information. There are influencers, right? And I think the important thing to think about of where does this fit in the armamentarium of options that people have to get their CME? Where does social media CME really fit? It really depends on the clinician. It depends on what kind of clinician they are. Allison Kickle and I have discussed that there's certain types of clinicians that are on Twitter, right? And Twitter is their jam. They hang out there. LinkedIn is another area. Instagram is going to be sometimes where you see a lot more of the patient advocacy groups. And Allison Gardner, I know you've had success there on Instagram and having Instagram lives. You can use patient influencers, patient advocates, finding these individuals that are people we look to and connect to. Again, we talked about this. The reason why social media CME is really working these days is because I would actually say it's because of the pandemic. If you think about the pandemic time, we became so disconnected. And the only thing we couldn't go to in person, right? We couldn't go to there, everything was canceled or it was closed. We weren't traveling. And instead, I found myself and my other clinician friends going to social media to as a means to stay connected with their partners, with their friends, with their family. And then also it's just that's where you did everything, right? And so the way you really connect with someone on social media, the way you can't connect or you can connect in real life, it's through storytelling. It's through connecting. So social media, when you can as a user, when you really can connect through a story. Stories, Allison Gardner said, here, we're here to change the hearts and minds. A good story can do those two things, right? A good story can actually convince someone to change their mind about something. That's a measurable outcome. Change their heart. That's harder to measure. But we're here saying we have some comments we've read before about the impact that you won't see on a survey necessarily, but you can make impact on social media. You can touch a heart, you can change a mind about something that you weren't even considering. So that's my place of where it fits.
That's awesome. That was great. Thank you. So let's pick up on another thread that came up a little bit ago and talk about sort of the darker side, the dangerous side of social media, because all of us do acknowledge that this can get a little squirrely, right? You put it out into the world and you hope that everybody is well behaved, but sometimes they're not, right? So let's talk about maybe limitations of this platform. And one thing that we talked about in our call was social media is not right for every audience. So a question came through, like, who is it working great for? It's working great for oncologists, but there are audiences that they're not largely there. So why don't we talk about that for a moment? Somebody want to jump in on that one?
I will comment. I mean, I think if you consider cosmetic derm, medical derm, where are they? It's more natural for cosmetic derm to be on Instagram, and they are. Some medical derm may be on Twitter, but when you're going into this, you need to know your audience. I would say that applies to any of your work in continuing ed. If you don't know your audience, then learn them and then do it, or don't work in that audience, because you need to understand from an adult learning theory what's going to work for them.
Yeah, the subsets within those audiences, and I guess I mean specifically the demographics and the age and whether they're where they are as far as technology. So that's why I think it's part of a complete portfolio. So certainly wouldn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
I also think too, if we ignore the fact that sometimes things fail, you do your absolute best. But if everyone in the industry told me that you had every single breakfast symposia and your room was full, I got to call you out. So we've all had things that haven't worked. This is going to be no different. We have to use a quality mindset when we go into it. So do our best, plan, go back, look at it, improve. I mean, it really does follow the fundamental rules of our industry.
Yeah. And I do think part of that is really taking consideration of, even as basic as a thing as choosing your faculty, right? So if you can have digital opinion leaders that are part of the faculty that are helping you to drive, just like I drive attendance and participation, just like that top key opinion leader that's most published at a symposium, that's super important. So those considerations, there's a lot of them, but that's what's going to help us get folks in the butts in the seats of the symposium per se.
And so, Janan, what do you think about in terms of like instructional design too, right? We can't just pick up what we would do on an LMS and put it into social media. So can you talk about the design aspect of this?
Absolutely. So, what is instructional design? It is making sure you can create a learning experience and have materials that will result in the application of knowledge that someone's coming to learn, right? And so that platform, knowing that a Twitter space is not going to have video, but you're choosing, for example, as Kurt just mentioned, choosing the right audience or choosing the right presenter. And if your whole basis is that everyone can visually recognize this person as the faculty, and then they're in a place where you're not used to hearing them, you're used to just seeing that person, do you see there's a mismatch in the instructional design? So it's really important here, as a summary, to really know what do the platforms do? So there are limitations where either it's the commercial supporter that has a lack of understanding of what platform. So they say, yeah, do an Instagram live. But it's, again, as we said, maybe it's for a condition where people aren't on Instagram. Your audience is not on Instagram. So that instructional design, the decisions that you're making, the visuals, the infographics, anything that you can create, you want to make sure, as we continue to say, it meets the needs of the target audience. And so anytime that's misaligned, there's going to be a failure, right? There's going to be a failure, or it's going to look like it wasn't successful. But again, as we're all saying, persevere. Something may not seem or look successful, but I think we're all here to say we want to make sure we're making some sort of impact. And, I know Allison G, you're our moderator, but I really love some of the quotes and some of the times you told us about how you knew why you knew what you were doing with your company to have these, you know, patient advocacy moments. Do you mind sharing a little bit? Because that's what changed my heart about, wow, it really is a real deal. It's not a shiny object.
Yeah, the goosebumps immediately came when you started talking about it. And it sounds corny, but, some of the examples that I'm happy to share is, mostly around our patient education work. There was a session that we did looking at COVID vaccines and hesitancy and medical mistrust. So we brought a Black physician, put them together with a Black influencer, to be able to have this safe conversation. And it was fantastic. They just really got into the issues that, were on that community's mind. And we had a colleague in our parent company. She's a Black woman, and she reached out to us afterward, and she's like, I got vaccinated because of that conversation. And that was not a small thing, right? And ooh, getting the goosies. I mean, it's just when you can bring information and education to people and they can make a decision like that. Another example, I think we shared it at the AIS meeting. Our influencer partner, Jeanette, who has, she's a Hispanic woman, and that is a large part of her community. She shared with us that oftentimes women in that community they're not very vocal about their health stuff, right? And we did a session with her around menopause, and it's not something that you have to suffer through. And a woman reached out to her in her DMs to say, I realize that my doctor is not doing right by me, and I'm going to find a doctor that actually partners with me better. And to empower somebody like that, and that was just from a conversation that was happening on Instagram. So I do hold on to those stories, as Janan was saying, and that's in the patient sphere, but who's not to say that happens all over the place. So I really do think that there's reach and power in social media that I think would be to benefit all of the learners in our spheres. I do, before we break though, Allison, you've been working long in social media with clinicians, and you kind of know the underbelly of some of the platform limitations and risks. So can you talk a little bit about that? I think that's something that a lot of people might not think about initially.
Sure. I mean, I'm scared to death of Elon Musk for multiple reasons, but what does a takeover of Twitter look like? How does it affect our programs? Anytime any of these platforms pushes an update or a new program push, how does that affect your existing programs? How does it affect your current programs? I mean, there was an issue with video 2 weeks ago, and I was very thankful that I didn't have a launch scheduled for that day. So it was just affected on Twitter. So I could have pushed it on YouTube and then pushed it through, but you have to be there. There are a lot of tech challenges. I sort of go to the gamification session where they ran into all sorts of issues. You can run into all sorts of issues in anytime you're working on technology. And I think a major takeaway point, though, I want to make is anything that's really going to create change is going to take work and a little bit of risk. So when you work out, when your muscles shake, that's when you're growing and changing. We should apply those same principles here. So yes, there is risk, manage appropriately, educate yourselves thoroughly on the platform and the audience, and then go into it full bore, in my opinion.
Great. I'm going to throw a couple last questions. We had a bunch of questions come in, and some we're not going to be able to get to, but a couple more I want to throw in there. I think I know the answer to this one. Okay, this also came over the CME Outfitters Q&A line. How do you promote social media CME if you or your organization does not have a strong social media presence itself?
Your faculty.
Yeah, I barely have any, my company has barely any followers. It's not the intention for people to follow on my platform. I do infectious disease and GI and oncology. It wouldn't make sense. So work within the different channels of your faculty or a champions campaign. Different people are doing this differently, but that's an effective strategy.
Micro and macro influencers, and have a strategy.
Okay, great. One last question. So I know most of the tutorials, patient education that you guys do is commercially supported. What has been your experience with funders? Have they been adaptable to supporting this type of education, or have there been some that are risk averse to jump into this kind of unfiltered world?
It's all over the boards. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, know your stuff and be honest. Be a little bit vulnerable about what the challenges are. I mean, I've been talking about this since 2016, and I will admit my failures, but I will also applaud successes for myself or for other people. So I think it's a rising tide lifts all ships.
Okay, great. So somebody else was asking for examples of good social media CME. So I will say, so that our presenters don't have to toot their own horns, go to their organizations. They each do outstanding work in social media-based CME, or else they would not have been invited on this panel. All right, so very quickly, we are going to go back to our audience response question. Let's see how we did. Social media in CME, shiny object or real deal? I'll give people a couple moments to get back to their phone onto Poll Everywhere to see how we did. We broke about 60-40 prior to the activity. And it looks like we're doing a little bit better, significantly better afterwards. So good job, everyone. It looks like you have changed some opinions. And personally, I think that this is going to be a space that we're going to be hearing a lot more about. Certainly, people seem to be very interested in the work and how to do this and how to do this well. So, all right. So before we wrap this up, we do have a brief survey on the CME Palooza website on the live tab. Gives a sense of who's watching, what kind of sessions you want to hear more about in the future. Just a few questions, so if you could please complete that when you have a chance. And finally, for those people who do enjoy money, we have the CME Palooza scavenger hunt going on today, and it's going to run through Friday, October 21st. So go to the website of the promotion sponsor, which is Broadcast Beat Studios. Their website's here, www.broadcastbeatstudios.com, and look for the CME Palooza logo. Once you find it, click on it and see what happens. I promise your computer will not get a virus and explode. So to view the next session, you don't need to refresh your browser. Just look on our live page and click the appropriate session link. It'll start shortly here in about 2 minutes. And as a reminder, the archives of this and all CME Palooza Fall sessions can be found on the agenda tab as well as the archive tab. And we'd like to thank Array for supporting our archive. So with that, I'd like to thank Allison and Janan and Kurt for joining us today. And we will see everyone soon.
Thanks so much.
Well,
Thank you.